once I discovered the power of gratitude and a recognition that at any point I could tune into that frequency of gratitude, I realized that it was far less what was happening in the world and far more about how I was perceiving what happened. And that really is sort of the basic framework of today's conversation. And the conversation, or the title, is You Are Unharmable. And I want to go back and share where this originated, this idea of affirming and knowing and really understanding, not just intellectually, but really having an experience that we are unharmable, came from a very interesting time in my life. And I'm going to go out on a limb because, as Mark Twain says, we go out on a limb because that's where the fruit is. I don't know if he ever said that, but that's what social media told me that's what Mark Twain said. Let's go out on a limb because that's where the fruit is. So that sounds good to me. It was this year called 2020, and it was in the summer of 2020, and there were a few things happening in the world that seemed pretty unsettling. And I think we all know, or we all have a particular experience, our individual experience and our collective experience of what was happening on planet Earth in the summer of 2020. And let's just say there were a lot of opportunities for us to take a look at what we called reality and how we were contributing to consciousness, collective consciousness and individual consciousness. And I say it this way: what started as a conversation in a coffee shop, once we were allowed to go back to coffee shops, which I think was probably around that time, I was having a conversation with my wonderful friend and colleague, Jeremy Miller. And he asked me a question. He said, "What is, if you could distill your message, your life's message that you want to share with the world into one key concept or one sentence, what would it be?" Now, being a student of New Thought, I knew to pause, to take a deep breath, and to ask inner wisdom, what is that core message that I want to bring to the world at this time that feels really unsettling? And when I paused and when I went within, I asked myself, because at that point, I had 3 books that had been published, and I had been, part of Agape and part of Unity. I'd been in New Thought for many years. I'd been working in addiction treatment. I had had such a beautiful life of being in service to others. And I thought, what is that core message? And what would it be to distill it into one sentence? And as I reflected on it, it came up as a question. And that question was, what if underneath everything that's ever happened to you, and regardless of everything you've ever done, there's a place within you that is unharmed and unharmable? And I said out loud to Jeremy, you are unharmable. And I remember just the felt sense at that moment that the simplicity of that statement was not only really powerful, but it also could be heard through a lot of different lenses, right? And so if I think, you are unharmable, we might hear that as like, nothing could ever hurt me because I'm so strong. But what I'm really talking about here is the foundational principle in most every New Thought tradition and many ancient wisdom teachings, and that is unity's principle. There is only one power and one presence active in the world and in my life. And that is this omnipresent power, this essence, this beingness that so many people try to describe and put words to and label. We might call it Buddha nature or Christ consciousness. We might call it infinite beingness. But this idea, which is not a thought, but it's a true experience of who and what we truly are, or as I like to say, who we truly be, even though I understand that's not grammatically correct, who we truly are is infinite. There's only one power and one presence. And as we started this conversation, we asked ourselves, how can we be a mouthpiece for this message during this time where we're being told that we're divided, where we're being told that you have to believe this. And if you don't believe this, or if you have an opinion that's different than this, you might be ostracized from your group. There's some things that were happening at a very core level of what we would call our ego or our personality or our thoughts, that if we don't conform in some way, or if we say something that is opposed to something that we might be hearing, we might literally be canceled, right? Remember, that was like, you're going to get canceled. And I remember thinking, Einstein was said to have said that you cannot shift the consciousness of an issue with the same consciousness that created the issue. And of course, that's a paraphrase. But I recognized at that moment that there was such simplicity in saying there is something beyond this message of right, wrong, good, bad, us and them, and the divisiveness that was happening. And this awareness that underneath all of our behavior, beyond every thought we've ever had about ourselves, beyond every opinion I've ever had about the world, beyond all of that, beyond my physicality, beyond my intellect, beyond even my emotions, that there is this place, this power, this source of infinite energy that is the truth of my being. And to know that and to experience that and to allow that to permeate every particle of our being is to live in a dramatically different way. In other words, absolutely nothing needed to change on planet Earth in order for me to be free. And I ran across a quote from Krishnamurti this week, and I thought I would share it because I think this kind of distills what I'm really, really wanting to communicate today. He said, one of the greatest traps into which we fall is the idea that we must seek and find, but we don't actually know what we are seeking. And so we come into this world as an infinite being. We come into this world as a spark of divinity. We come into this world one with source, and we're born on planet Earth, and then we start to become programmed by well-meaning and maybe some not so well-meaning people who start to teach us the ways of the world. And so we start to then develop an idea or a personality that we might call our ego, a BS belief system that then puts a container around this effervescent spirit that each of us is. And then we can spend our entire life trying to unlearn all of that stuff we learned early on. And right now, we're living in very exciting times because we're starting to measure scientifically what mystics have been saying for thousands of years. I remember being a little kid, and I remember thinking, this placebo effect thing is really interesting, because I remember hearing about the placebo effect. And I remember I had a doctor that said, if you're ever not feeling well, just take 100 milligrams of vitamin C or 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C every hour, and you'll never get sick. And I thought, I believe him. And so as a little kid, I did that. Anytime, from the time I was a little kid until I was a young adult, anytime I started to feel off a little physically, I would take this vitamin C and I would never get sick. And it was true. I found myself maybe getting sick every 3 or 4 years while people around me were getting sick all the time. And I heard this idea of the placebo effect, and I thought, what is that? And I started to study that or look at that. And then I was really curious why we weren't more curious about that. So I was curious why we weren't collectively more curious, or why the medical establishment wasn't more curious about this idea that you can give someone a sugar pill and they will have this dramatically higher ability to heal. There's something to that, right? And so those of us who have been in New Thought, and those of us who are aware of this place within us that is infinite, understand, and like I said, not just intellectually, but experientially, that the way we perceive the world is the way we experience the world. And that statement, in all of its simplicity, is also deeply profound. Because I spent, if I'm honest, probably my entire 20s trying to change the world. The world was broken. It needs to not be this way. There's inequality, there's pain in the world, and I need to be part of changing it. And it came from a very, I think, loving place. It was breaking my heart to see what was happening in the world. But I realized at some point that it was my perception of reality that was creating what I was calling reality. And that when I changed my perception, and the reason I'm talking about perception is I want to talk about layers of perception, because if you're like me, when I came to New Thought, 1988, I talked about that right before we came on today, and in the green room, if you will. And I was thinking, 1988, I was 23 years old, and I was very hungry. I was searching, as Krishnamurti said. I wanted so desperately to seek and find. And I thought if I could just get the perfect relationship, I would be happy. If I could find the perfect community, I would be happy. Even the idea that if I could change my thinking, Jesse, you were talking about your thoughts, and like some of these thoughts are really useful, and some of them it's like, oh my goodness, where did that come from? And I thought if I could just have a different narrative about my life. There was this idea that I needed to get somewhere other than here in order to be free, and that it was going to somehow be a process. And I learned about affirmations when I came to Unity, and I learned that thoughts create reality. And I was in this ever expanding awareness that, oh my gosh, there's so much more to life than what I thought there was. But at the core of it, I still felt broken. And I didn't realize that at the core of my being, not the very core of my being, but maybe we can say one layer up, if you will, I believed that what I had done was unforgivable. I believed that what happened to me shouldn't have happened. If you want a very, very simple definition of suffering, that shouldn't have happened. That to me is the simplest definition of suffering. They shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't think that way. That political party should not be in power. That person shouldn't be running for president again. Why is that person in office? It doesn't matter where we attach that to. The idea that somehow the world needs to be different so that I can be free. And Krishnamurti says, we don't even know what we're actually seeking. And what I've come to understand in my own experience, and about 100% of every person I've ever worked with, is what we're truly desiring is to experience ourselves at a deep level, to understand that we are each particles of the divine. And somewhere deep within us, we all know that at a very deep level. But for many of us, as a matter of fact, I dare to say, and I think I can say this, for those of us born on planet Earth, which I'm assuming is everyone here, but it may not be true, but let's just assume we're all born on planet Earth. Regardless of how loving your family was or how great your education was, we came into a world that on some level was teaching us about right and wrong and good and bad. And of course, we need to teach our kids, don't run out into the street, right? We want to tell them, we want to protect them. Unfortunately, though, along with those very useful skills, we also teach them, oh, good girls don't do that. Boys don't walk that way. Our family doesn't believe that. God says this. This is the right way to see. This is the right way to be. And because of those messages, overt and covert, most of us, and again, about 100% of us, on some level, start to develop the idea, well, if I don't believe that, or I don't do that, or I can't always meet this expectation that's been given to me, there must be something wrong with me. And this gets concretized into our unconscious or our subconscious at such a tender age. I remember when my nephew turned 7, and I looked at him and I thought, gosh, what a perfect child. And then I also remembered that that was the age I decided I was unlovable. And it's heartbreaking for me to look at this beautiful 7-year-old and to imagine that he might have been at that moment also deciding something so huge on such limited information. Our little brains aren't even developed enough to understand what's happening in the world. My little brain wasn't developed enough to understand that my parents were in a loveless marriage. And there was this energy and this tension that I felt all the time that was very confusing for me. I didn't understand that I was born into a world where boys needed to look and dress and talk and walk a certain way, and I didn't fit into that mold. So I believed there was something wrong with me. And these weren't thoughts, these were something deep within me that became, as I said, concretized, my favorite word, into the unconscious. And then that became the operating system. And that operating system meant that I couldn't possibly experience anything other than what those core false beliefs were. I am unlovable. I will see that everywhere. And so the reason that the message is so simple and yet to me so profound, I am unharmable, is to understand that underneath all of that, there is still this place of wholeness, and that life's journey, recovery, therapy, spiritual community, relationships, all of it, that seeking that Krishnamurti says we don't even know what we're seeking. It's truly to recognize and re-experience what's always been there. And so if I'm out of alignment with the truth of my being, if I believe that I'm broken or damaged, that becomes, as I said, the operating system at which we look at the entire world through, and we will unconsciously continue to replicate those relationships to confirm that core false belief until we have that spontaneous insight, that moment. And it can be a process. It can be 20 years of therapy. Or it can be this instantaneous understanding that everything we've ever been seeking has always been right here within us. It's always been the truth of who and what we are. That we can call off this outer search, because as soon as I feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with me, I'm going to look to the world to try to feel whole again. And sometimes it's really fun to do that. Sometimes it's really fun to think, if I just get that next great outfit and look really perfect, there's something really exciting about that. Or I'm going to find the perfect partner. How many of us have done the vision boards? And once I get that house, I'm going to be okay. How many times in spiritual community, if anyone's ever served on a board of a spiritual community? Well, we don't, spiritual communities. Once we get here, once we get a certain amount of money, once we get to this next level, we will be okay. And that is the destination addiction. And it is showing us something. And that something is so simple. And that is, we have confused who and what we are. We have a distorted idea that we are limited or broken or damaged or not good enough. All those words that have so much weight to them, so much heaviness. And then we've externalized it into the world, into our communities. And then we might think, like I did for that decade in my 20s, that if I could just get the world to act a certain way, I could be happy. I could be free. If he could just be more loving. Now we talk about toxic relationships, removing toxic relationships. We can label people as narcissists, because then I don't have to be accountable, that I'm the chooser. And I want to be really careful here. We're not saying we want to blame ourselves. We want to say, oh my gosh, isn't it amazing that I keep choosing these unavailable people to confirm the core false belief? I remember one of my first teachers, Reverend Maureen Bass, I love her, at Unity San Francisco back in the early 2000s. She would say, if your bank account is really small, and it's been really small for many, she's Southern, so I'm trying to do the accent, but she's so amazing, that you keep over and over and over again, manifesting lack in your life, I want you to stop right now and I want you to say out loud, I am so powerful. I'm so powerful. I keep creating lack and limitation. Look at me. I'm such a powerful magnet to lack and limitation, because that's what I believe I deserve. That's who I believe I am. And with just a little tiny switch, which can take a lifetime or happen in an instant, I can use that same energy to say, I am so grateful. I am infinite. I am unharmed and unharmable. Not only do I deserve a life filled with love, I am here to be the frequency of love. It's who I am. I'm the luckiest person alive. Life is so beautiful. I think what I want to close with is something that has been said many times, but I think it is something that in its simplicity can be powerful. Words have frequency, words have energy. There's an energy that's attached to words. And I think it was Nikola Tesla said that if you want to think about the future, you want to think about the future in terms of energy and frequency. Now, he might have been talking about something a little different than I'm talking about, but maybe not, because life is energy and everything has a frequency. Everything has an energy. So if I say, why does this keep happening to me? There's nothing wrong with that. It just has a frequency, and that frequency creates my ability to choose. And I can only choose relationships that match vibrationally. I can only choose new work situations or new business opportunities that match the frequency. So I can start looking at like what words have the frequency that I want to live in. Not because it's magic, even though it feels magic, but because it's so simple. Frequencies align. And so what I wanted to say before that little tangent was the simplicity of the words that I think have the most power, and heaven knows I'm not the first to say this, thank you. And, Meister Eckhart said, if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, it will be enough. And so I start my day each day with thank you, and I end my day with thank you. Not thank you for anything, but thank you. Just the energy, the frequency of gratitude itself, to be in that frequency. Our friend Michael Beckwith, I asked him one day, how do you start your day? And he said, I start every day with thank you. And then I say, how can I serve? Thank you. How can I serve? And so, let's say something looks like it's not going so well. Thank you. Thank you for this experience, because I know with one slight shift in awareness, we can say shift happens, or we can call it fertilizer. Fertilizer for new growth. Fertilizer happens. Thank you for this experience. Thank you for that wound that got touched, because there's an opportunity to heal. Thank you when that person said something and I found myself being reactive. Thank you. I get to see myself, and I'm going to see myself with love and compassion. Thank you. Thank you when I'm walking down the street and I see a beautiful child look up at me. Thank you for that momentary glance. Thank you, traffic in LA. It's an opportunity for me to slow down and take a breath and reflect on who I am and why I'm here. Thank you when the traffic parts and I get someplace quickly. Thank you. See, it's not attaching the thank you to anything. That's where our mind can be such a trickster. And once I understood that I have thoughts and I'm not my thoughts, I realized gratitude does not need to be attached to anything. And as Krishnamurti said, that thing that we don't even know we're seeking, it doesn't even need to be sought, because it's here, it's who we are. And so then we shift from, as I've said many times, from the law of attraction to the law of radiance. We are here to be the light, to be the love, regardless of what's happened in our lives, regardless of what we have done. There is a place within us that's unharmed and unharmable. Love is who we are. And my invitation to each of us is to simply be that.